So welcome to No Rules Berlin. Today we're talking about the best kept secret in Silicon Valley, John McMahon. And I'm super excited to have Roman here and he will talk about it. And I guess this is going to be an amazing episode.
Yeah, hopefully I can contribute. I guess so.
So let's get started. So who the hell is John McMahon and how did we find out about him? Very good friend of mine, German. His uncle is in Silicon Valley since 25 years, living in Woodside, and he's a partner at Sutter Hill Ventures. And 3 years ago, when we were doing Hackaday, and I remember we were standing in San Francisco, he was like, "Did you ever hear of John McMahon?" I was like, "Who the hell is John McMahon?" He was like, "He's the best kept secret in Silicon Valley." And so John McMahon is this legendary enterprise sales figure who's the only person who multiple times could manage to lead sales teams from 1 million annual recurring revenue to over $1 billion in recurring revenue. And when you look today at the successes of Snowflake, MongoDB, Okta, and other multi-billion-dollar outcomes, somehow all the time John McMahon was involved. And I guess since then, Roman, since we know about this best kept secret, we are like trying to learn everything we can about John McMahon.
Correct. And that was kind of for me this mind-blowing insight, and perhaps for the audience to understand why this was kind of changing for me. Me and Christian know from Hackaday. So I was leading the growth team in Hackaday. After this, I was leading the growth team at education startup. Both grew tremendous, but the issue was always like, how do you structure everything? And once you scale, you have a lot of kind of difficulties, especially when you try to lead a team. And for me, when we found out about this insight, he was honestly the first person who ever described how to manage and grow a sales team efficiently. And before, I never saw this, and that was for me kind of this changing moment. And from there on, sales was much more easier. And I don't know if any of the audience is responsible for sales. It's kind of the hardest job, because I usually make fun, like you can always build a product, but to make it grow, it's a kind of a different topic. And that's why the whole topic about John McMahon was for me such great insight to work more efficiently.
Yeah, and I guess like going back one point about secrets, and especially secrets in Silicon Valley, maybe Olcay, like we know it from the product world. You know, there's just certain things, the moment you know them, everything gets easier. And I guess like maybe Olcay, like why do secrets actually matter in venture capital? And you know, it doesn't matter if it's sales or product, just in general, why do you think they are so important? And then I guess, especially sales, we can then get into details why they matter.
Yeah, I mean, why do secrets matter? It's of course important. Just look at the. I always love to go back to this phrase from Peter Thiel, that you should find this one secret that nobody sees but actually is true. That you are going full throttle and invest like that. That's where you're going for, what we're shooting for, basically. And ideally, you find a VC that believes the same thing, so that you're like sort of co-conspiracy, people, one gang, going full throttle on that idea, and nobody else is seeing that, right? So secrets matter. And the other thing, I mean, I didn't know the name John McMahon, but looking back at my time, I used to be in sales in a very technical role at an international technology company. And my sales boss would, basically taught me the same things, because I was coming from technology engineering / product. Now I was jumping like into sales, right? And I would support sales in a technical role, so that ideally you would have less, let's say, homework when you meet with customers, like C-level people, that you would have less round trips and narrow down stuff much more quicker, right? And a couple of days ago, when we talked about the next episode, I was doing a little bit of research on what type of things actually this person, John McMahon, himself or under his management were developed is this one principle of this MEDDIC or Netpick, depending on how you define it, principle, right? So and if I look at compared to what I was taught at this technology company, it's the same sort of process, and I can tell you that this process is it is so it's 99% the reason why we won these deals back then, because it makes it so much clearer. It's like if I would compare, because I'm wearing both hats, if I compare these principles of MEDDIC or Netpick, depending on how you define, to the typical processes and things on how you to approach technical challenges, it is the equivalent of that on how to get a structured approach to kill it in sales. And I'm not sure. I mean, we could go through this in this call if you like, but I think that's the one thing that I could see immediately that I was taught as well in sales, because we were in in international sales team in this corporation, and it was when I saw it, it was so clear to me, because I knew that we have the same things in technology, and this would help me to demystify a little bit sales, because for me sales was always this thing where you go golfing with someone and have drinks and then magically somehow you sell. But the reality is it's such a great profession where you can be very structured, very smart on your approach in different phases of your sales process to actually win. And I think that's also a secret for itself at the end.
Yeah, definitely. I still hope that it's still a good sale. It's still good to do a sale on a golf course because it's just so much more fun, and have some drinks beside it. But the most interesting part, which not a book is really describing, to be honest, because when I started my career, obviously I was coming from, like many of you guys, from hackathons. I just found my sweet spot in the growth environment. But from there, I just had to read all the books. And what he does different, he gives you really a better manageable way. I mean, every other book is just describing about need to nail a niche, obviously, but he's really describing if you really want to scale. And what he does perfectly, because you already said about the Netpick structure, he says there are two parts. The first one is need to have a sales process. I mean, that's obvious, can be different depending on the product you have, depending on the industry you're working in. You really need to follow a specific step-by-step model. Then if you can really forecast. But his Netpick, which is very similar to the Bend model, which everyone knows, he describes it in his book. It's like a GPS system, because the map is always there. But the question is, if Google Maps wouldn't have GPS and you wouldn't know where you start and where you're moving next, it would lead you to the totally wrong path. And that's such the beauty of his system. He says, okay, you have your kind of funnel or your model, but then you really need to analyze. And all the question he does, he's also putting it into B2B enterprise world. He says you always have a champion, you always have kind of a buying persona. And if you have this in mind, he especially uses it as a sales manager, but if you're good in managing yourself, this model is helping you to be that much better, because if you really can forecast this deal. And these two levels of abstraction was, for me, the most important part about the whole topic, I have to say.
Yeah, maybe I'm additioning, just going back to the, that's super interesting what you guys are talking about. And I would love to really dive into the details, just coming back one, before we dive into the details, the best kept secret, what I found so fascinating when we were in San Francisco and hiring for sales roles. We were like, oh, we have revenue, we need to find somebody who is selling. And then later we found out the really secret in Silicon Valley is if you can hire someone who was an alumni of the McMahon gang, and he was a senior sales leader at some alumni McMahon company, where somehow McMahon was involved. It makes a huge difference for venture capital VCs. The people who know, oh, this person was at a McMahon company. Okay, they have the right network. They know the right people. They have the right processes. They have the right methodologies. And here comes the proof point. A McMahon alumni would never start at a shitty SaaS company that can't grow towards like $1 billion annual recurring. Why? Because those guys want to win. So they want to play on the right team. And that was for me mind-opening. Like when we're now thinking about investing in startups, one of the key things is like, when would John McMahon invest? Like when would someone from the John McMahon alumni, when would this person come in? And then the moment you have this as like a North Star for your VP of sales, not, oh, I need to find a great VP of sales. Like, how do you know? And for us, it's like, well, this person should have been trained on the McMahon teams. And as a consequence, this person will have the right network, the right people, and they will just crush it. And that's kind of like the big picture, where I think that's like the real secret in order to win in the enterprise game. And look at the outcomes of Sutter Hill Ventures, like Snowflake, 100 billion, and MongoDB, 100 billion. And so like those really big enterprise SaaS companies, that they have this like amazing sales teams. And maybe one last thing, like where I would like to dive in, finding the right salespeople, like finding the right teams, is really eye-opening how McMahon is going about sales and where he hires those people and what he really cares about. And maybe Roman, some ideas there.
Definitely, but because you just mentioned it, I think that was also, if we're allowed to talk about it, Chris, for us, or for me, and I think we too realize it, if we do angel investing, because from time to time, we're focused on this, we kind of change the metrics, as you just described as a North Star. But what we realize is, when we do a B2B investment, since we really do pre-seed and go in very early, and we try to help the team to grow. And usually when we find people from the Valley or from San Francisco, they're very product driven. So how can you really help a product company in the B2B environment to really go to the next level? And what we define as a metric, and that's probably the biggest insight of this talk, is can we get a startup, our company, to a level where not let's say one of the bigger VCs is approving it and is doing a follow-up investment. Can we build a product with a sales process where John McMahon approves it? Because if he approves it, everyone in the Valley knows, okay, that's a no-brainer to invest. And I think for me personally, that's a much, much better process to focus on, rather than kind of, and I don't want to be rude to some startups, but don't invest any numbers and don't invest any traction or invent any traction. We just want to focus, can we build a process where John McMahon wants to invest and proves it? Because from there, it's very easy to get follow-up rounds. That's kind of our theory. I'm not sure if we're allowed to talk about it, Chris, but you can, that's the beauty about Colin, right? You can really delete it, but I thought if we have listeners, and we should really put in some value here.
Just to add to what Chris just said, and also you, Roman, about when you can hire such a person, such a sales person to your company, it has a certain signal. It's signaling something to venture capital firms, right? And I can explain exactly why. Because in MEDDIC, the M stands for metrics, the first D stands for decision criteria, and you also have the I for implicate or identify pain. So what will happen naturally if you don't hire a salesperson on day one, right? So on day one, you have to see co-founders doing that somehow and so on. But at some point, it's necessary. So at some point, you need proper salespeople. And so when you then talk to someone that is like fully on that train, they understand the principles, they applied that in other companies, and now you want them to come over to your company to do it for you. What they would naturally do, because that's how they live, like that's the common process. That's how they work. They will look at your company and say, okay, show me what your metrics are. Show me what as part of the decision process, what kind of technology, infrastructure, security, whatever decision criteria is. How do you handle that, etc. And then also show me what kind of pain points you're killing with your product. So what is actually happening as a side effect is that these people are looking at your company and they would say, okay, is this something, are they bullshitting everyone, or is this something that actually addresses these matrices at the potential customer, right, at the prospect? Do they actually address the pain points? Like if I go into the process of selling, like you have your sales machinery set up, and they're wondering, can we now fix it or establish it for them? If I join the company, they will look at the metrics, they will look at the decision criteria, etc., and also at the pain points that or when you at some point come to that point where you want to implicate the pain and so on. Is that actually possible? So you can't. It's kind of like a certification process or bullshit filter. Is this company actually like too early, or is it like, did they find product market fit and now we need to scale up the sales and we need to set up proper sales pipeline, etc.? That's what they're doing. And if they look at the metrics, the decision criteria, and how you're dealing with that, if they look at how you could implicate pain in order to position your product accordingly, that's why it is then later for the VC a certain signal effect, because they did the due diligence sort of on the sales aspect for you. And if they say, check, these guys, they have something, they're killing this pain point, we can set up a proper sales process here, so that we can also then look at, I don't know, the full Netpick process, and we will be able to execute in that workflow. That's like sort of the signal, I think, what then gets to the VCs that say, okay, they did now the due diligence on the sales part. I think this should tell us that we should actually invest here, or at least they don't care that much anymore about the sales because someone else looked at it for them.
That's very clever. It's like you summarized it correctly. It's a due diligence done by specific people who gives kind of the trust for a lot of the VCs. Mm-hmm. It's very good.
Exactly.
But Chris, you asked me about like how to find the right salespeople, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like some of the insights that John McMahon over his long career, it's very counterintuitive what he cares for in salespeople, because we all have kind of, especially being more product driven, we kind of all have this image of the salesperson, but he really he's the master in enterprise software sales. So it's like he is the one for this category in Silicon Valley. Of course, you have insurance sales, Coca-Cola sales, whatever, but he is really the master in this category. And so there, I guess, like I would love.
I think the biggest insight is, and this should be more like a disclosure for everyone who wants to read more about him afterwards, is once you read how he thinks about salespeople, you can't go back. Like, it's so eye-opening. Like the first time we talked about him and after I read his book, I could really see that 90% of people who are doing sales around me are totally shit. Because at the end of the day, he describes it so well that a salesperson needs to have a PhD. We don't talk a Stanford PhD. He talks about like a good person needs to have a persistent heart and desire. These are kind of description. And if you dive deeper, because this is not even said in his book, because I have to say, if you read the book, it's very kind of nice. But if you find some talks about him, he will say, okay, if you really need to have a good salesperson, he needs to have IQ of 130 plus. Why? He needs to be the smartest person in the room. Because usually, if you sell and if you go into enterprise sales, there is not easy budget. Like, you can try to steal from other competitor, but usually if you are in a growing company, like if you're in a startup and helping them to get to the IPO, it's not like that you just like have to be better than your competitor. You need to generate new budget. And that's why you need to be the most interesting and clever person in the room. I mean, we experienced it kind of when we did enterprise sales, like we sold to the Swiss military and Volkswagen. The interesting part is, how did we do it? We had our pitch, we had our story, but we always closed when we had the chance to get onto the whiteboard and start kind of showing the solution real time. I mean, Olja, you did it too, right? When you were working at a technology company, you needed the whiteboard. You need to present the people that you are clever, that your IQ is above 130, so that the people will trust you with the budget. And for me, that's kind of the hardest thing. If you really understand how to get good salespeople, you barely find them. And that's for me kind of the hard progress. And at the same time, what I would like to add, I don't know if I would stop it because another kind of idea about the salespeople afterwards. But for me, that was kind of the biggest insight. You need to have the really intelligent people and not just the hardworking people. You need both. You need both. And that's kind of the biggest, but also hardest insight for me.
Yeah, that's the famous phrase from him, right? You're looking for two skills, intelligence and the PhD, and then actually the PhD is just the persistence, heart, and desire. Because I think he said somewhere, I saw that he was saying that if someone is basically was like outlining or explaining what that means. He said that if you have someone smart, they will just gain the knowledge required in the game to understand it. They will persist enough and determine the practices for new skills and what have you. So yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And then just on top of that, of course, you need people with integrity, coachability, and adaptability. But I can just confirm this is in sales. I was a technical person, but I was like fully inside the team that does the sale, and I can just confirm like the top salespeople in these international companies that directly sell to the CTOs of companies of 100,000 employees. That's the skills that you're looking for. Like they will dig into, and even if you're in a specific business, like we're in the TV and media space, but even inside that part of the business, like just TV and media, you have so many variations of how actually technologies work, and products are different, and you have different circumstances and what have you. So you have to adapt and quickly and understand what's the pain points, how can I help them. And we had this funny phrase inside the company that said, if you kill their pain point and you see the delta of the benefit, you just at the end you would just ask how much of that delta should stay in my pocket, So, so I can just confirm like this is exactly how it works in the top salespeople, how they work actually. And then of course you do the golfing and the drinks as well, of course, but that's just a nice side effect.
And I guess like one of the fascinating things, and that was really the point, is like when you want to create new budgets. So I guess one of the most interesting budgets in the last 5 to 10 years in enterprise was self-driving car software. So there comes out those Silicon Valley startups created by some kids that build a self-driving car in their garage. And a few years later, they're selling like multi-million-dollar simulation software to Ford. When you're creating those budgets, when you're creating those pain points, you need somebody who has the ability to understand the product, to understand the technology, to understand the defensibility, and then on the customer side, all the politics, all the pain points. Why can't they build it themselves? Or why should they collaborate with you on a professional service? Why should there new jobs? Why should there new departments created? And it was eye-opening for me that when you really go in the enterprise sales where it's above the noise, where you're talking about $100 million budgets per year, $10 million budgets, like 5-year sales cycle, and you still start small and then you expand, like you really need people that are not the average salesperson, where traditionally people believe, well, you become a salesperson because you didn't get a job in engineering. And he kind of, for me, the first time showed, wow, there can be the 0.1% of salespeople. There can be the 1 in a million. And having a clear framework for actually finding those people and then developing them and then finding exactly the right opportunities on the startup side that they can really leverage their talent, just like a great product manager can leverage his or her talent on like a 100 million user product. I first time realized, wow, there's a person who really wants to find the top people and then give them the right opportunities. And that was eye-opening for me, especially coming more from the product world.
I have a question, by the way, more into the direction of you two, because you are founders, CEOs. I just had one thought in my mind. If you usually build up a product company and you're into a B2B enterprise sales, do you think it's even possible to, or when should you implement the let's call it a John McMahon process? Because what I realize is once you know this process and try to go into a startup, which let's say is already developed, has a sales process, a sales team, like I sometimes felt like the best way would be to fire everyone and really start from scratch, because it's so hard if you have, let's call them these old school salespeople who just say like, hey, I've been here for a few years and I know everything. Like, do you think it's possible or what would you do? You know, maybe we've been through this, that we had sales teams or salespeople working for us. And I just feel like if you need to either implement it in the beginning and hire, and if you already have people, you should probably fire them all and start from scratch, because it's so hard to mix it up.
Yeah, so let me try to address that. So you're saying your constellation now is it's an existing startup. There have been already people hired, like 1 or 2 salespeople, and now you're coming in with the Medic approach, and you want to implement that, right? So and you're saying, is it a full reset of the sales team, or is it like, can you like reconfigure them to work that way, or is it
Yes.
yeah?
I just come from the perspective that once you probably find out that there's a better process, is it possible to implement it into a team which already had a different sales process and who already usually get dragged to it like gravity, basically? Do you think it's possible, or what would you do?
So the beauty of this Medic approach is, I think it's super structured, right? So they tell you about each, like it's almost like step by step. It's metrics, it's economic buyers, finding them, identifying decision criteria, etc., etc. So the beauty of that is, because it's so structured, you could you could let people walk through that in their sales activities and try to reconfigure them. But if it doesn't work, of course you have to change people. I mean, and if it's super early, then anyway the CEO or CTO or someone else of the founding team is doing sales right now, and then you're starting anyway from scratch. But if there's already some people, I would let them walk through that Medic workflow and see how it goes, because one thing's clear, that will be the one that you will put in place, and people have to function in that framework and not the other way around. You will not sacrifice your sales for being nice to the existing salespeople. So it could be possible, but you have to try it out. And the beauty is, because it's so structured, you can just walk through it with them and see how it works, and if you need to make changes to your sales team.
To be honest, possible. I'm actually, the more I learn about it, and the more I really take this McMahon approach, I think it's like, of course it is possible with 100 people and so on, but I kind of have the feeling that there's a huge opportunity if you bake it into the culture very early on. And I noticed with a lot of salespeople, especially when you hire them, and we hired salespeople and older people and more senior, they're very stubborn because they have their own process. And they were successful in their process in the past somehow. And so, like, I noticed that really, I think it needs to be baked into the culture because of the learning rate of the salespeople, because also for salespeople, it's very risky to learn new stuff. Why? Because they have performance-based salary component. And when they change their process and they're not sure if it really works, it's possible that they miss their quota. And one of the key ideas of the Medic and McMahon thing is to really shoot for the stars and to really build an amazing sales culture where you win in the market. But I noticed that, especially with the short-term numbers-driven salespeople, where they say, oh, I did so many calls, and it's just a numbers game. I do 40 calls a week. I have this, and that, and then I will have, by the end of the quarter, I will have those stuff. And then I overestimate, underdeliver, but whatever, I will just do it in the next quarter. So they are like so much in the rat race that I noticed with very often they're very stubborn, and I don't know, like if you can really, as a culture or a company, I guess the only way to train your sales force on that, I guess you really need to have buy-in from the investors, that you might miss 2 or 3 quarters until they're all fully wrapped up on the new Matic framework. And so I'm personally more like thinking at the moment, how can you implement as much as possible at the seed stage, and at the first stage where you're a very small team, and then build it up from there, then like transforming your sales organization just just because of the pressure hitting the numbers from all parts, including being a CEO. Like if you take venture capital, you need to hit the numbers, otherwise you're fired yourself. And so I guess the experimentation level is very small, and maybe one of the reasons why John McMahon is such a secret is, well, Sutter Hill Ventures trust John McMahon. All the others trust Sutter Hill Ventures, but in the end of the day, he was having his home runs with always kind of the same investors, and that would actually show that it's way harder than expected to get the culture right for that.
I mean, that's probably also the like one of the most important insight. Like you need it's a team sport, right? And if you don't have the investors backing you in your decisions, because that's what I see. It's so hard. If like even if you are good at it, and that's probably also the insight why we thought like if we invest into a B2B enterprise startup, we need to have at least like as much as possible implemented into the culture, into the processes, that John McMahon is approving it, because you know that he would send in the top-notch people you won't find. And I think even you can try to go out and try to find these high IQ salespeople, which is really hard. Like, why should someone with a high IQ join a startup, blah, blah, blah? Like, you need to find them in this kind of, like, I guess you won't find them easy on LinkedIn. And that's what's so cool. If you can persuade John McMahon, he's going to do 3 calls, you have the perfect people in there. That's why I feel like it needs to be perfect, because if you get like one of his guys in, and the metrics or the process is not as they need it, you're going to definitely lose 2 to 3 quarters, because he needs to either replace the team, set up everything new, because it's so important to have everything in the right, like in the culture and in the company itself. And I guess that's kind of one of the most important things.
Yeah, just one more thing I want to add to what Chris said. So I wouldn't like completely write off the old sales guys, because there are certain businesses like health and military and also partially the TV, the media business, where I've seen it, where you can't find the economic buyer within the company, or you can find them but not get access to them unless you have these old sales guys or people that actually have the relationship and trust from them to open the doors, basically. Because sales is not always 100% product or technology play. It's sometimes, I mean, let's say the dirty play of who you know and who likes you, right? So I've seen it over and over again, where you won't, if you had that top media company that has a direct to consumer product, you wouldn't get even like be able to reach them or their assistant or whoever you need to reach out to this economic buyer, because they just block your way. So you need that old salespeople that actually spent their last 20 years in that industry to establish these connections and open the doors for you. And what you see often in this field is that you would have certain salespeople that are just coming in for that, right? So they are not like fully full employees. Instead, they are like the door openers that get nice bonuses for doing that, and they guide you a little bit, and they give you historical information on what happened in the industry for the past 10 years. But then, of course, sales, there are different people taking care of different things. There are solution architects working on the decision criteria and what have you. And often in specific areas, in specific businesses and industries, you have still these people, and you need them in order to get to the economic buyer. Otherwise, what you often see with the startups is that they are so happy that they're talking to someone at HBO or whatever, right? That is like their cheerleader or champion that promotes them internally, but the economic buyer might say no, and the other way around, you might have no champions or cheerleaders inside the prospect, the customer, let's say, but the economic buyer will say, yes, these are the guys. And in some industries, you need these people to open the doors and pave the way for you.
I would kind of disagree on this because I know what you try to say, that the people with like what you call back then, like they have a good phone book, you know what to talk to, like if they know the wires and so on. But then you can kind of also don't need the other parts, and you don't need a champion, because a champion is there for you to really identify the pain, identify the metrics, and so on, and he's going to push you to the economic buyer. If you just say like, okay, I have the old school people who directly know the economic buyer, and if he calls and he will buy, then you don't need the rest of the whole process, and that's not scalable as well. So that's kind of the old school thing. I kind of would disagree-ish on, because if you do if you identify the pain right, if you do the metric right, and if you understand the decision criteria, because what you say is if the champion doesn't give you any kind of intro to the economic buyer, he doesn't listen to him, then you have the wrong economic buyer per se, the wrong champion. Sorry, the wrong champion. And I wouldn't call it, because if your solution is great, if you identify the pain, the economic buyer gets fired if he doesn't agree on doing a deal with you, kind of. You know what I mean? Like if you have a really, really good thing, I mean, if you're very close and even to your competitor and you don't have the best metrics, yeah, then you need the kind of the old school guy. But I kind of feel like we had the experience, we hired a very experienced VP just because of this fact. But we realized is that he was not the biggest asset. And if you would have sticked with our process, like really working on the pain points, identify the metrics, finding champions, and from there build it up. Like we were just too like we were not calm enough. We tried to, let's get the VP in and he's gonna open us all the doors. No, he wasn't. He tried to do it and he really skipped every other step, because these old school people, they won't focus on the pain, they won't focus on the metrics. That's why I feel like I would kind of disagree. Sometimes I know this how it works sometimes, but you don't forget, like it's like we are in like the companies get older, people retire. So I would call this kind of, I have the phone book in my pocket, they don't really exist that much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm referring to is more these special cases where you have, in general, like very hard access to even the champions, the people that would directly report to these people.
I guess both of you are right, and Olja, definitely, like relations matter a lot, and especially I guess the trust transferred by those relations. And like we can't deny that. The only question is, as a startup, and John McMahon is the secret weapon of Silicon Valley. Like it's really like new technology companies get created on the promise of a technology breakthrough that is like a 10x, 100x better, cheaper, faster. And I guess in those industries, when you're in the startup game, we are all playing in the small leagues. And especially your experience being at one of the big tech companies, like you guys were playing the big leagues. So you had access to great people with great relations, great budgets. They could fly first class, they could take out the people to stake. But especially in the startup world, venture capital does not give you money to compete against the budgets of Microsoft, Google, or Amazon. They just don't give you the money because they're like, what the hell? Like then we just invest into the stock market. Those companies are anyways growing, so we need margin, and the margin is a derivative of the technology breakthrough. And there, I guess, there's the point where, from a pragmatic experience, especially with us selling into the enterprise, we knew, and that was one of the big mistakes that we forgot. We should have focused, and that's, I guess, what Roman says. We should have focused on the technology advantage, on our energy level, and especially on solving the pain point 10 times, 100 times better, cheaper, faster than any competitor out there. And that's like a priority versus having the person with the big relationships. Because the other company and the competitor, IBM or whatever, they also have a person with great relationships, and probably they can pay a lot more than you can do. And I guess looking at your startup today, Olcay, I remember when you told me that you were winning very early on against IBM and others. Why were you winning? You were winning because you had a way superior, better product that was solving their problem. And I guess that's what Roman was thinking, like, hey, how do you actually prioritize?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I was not like ruling out the other, or that there's no other way or something. I was just saying that there are these cases where that is actually necessary. But then the other thing is, as a startup, like you said, do you want to focus on that? Do you want to even go into that competition, or do you say, there's enough, other prospects that I could approach? Why would I waste my energy and time and money?
Totally agree with you, but I like that's kind of the beauty of this challenge, right? I mean, he wrote the book after he did, I think, 4 IPOs, right? Like, he is saying, hey, it's possible. Just follow my process, hire the right people, and you can kind of repeat his success. And that's the way, like, if a startup is using it, it should use it to kind of lead their way to an IPO. I mean, everyone is building a startup or starting a startup to have success, right? And why don't you think about the IPO early on? But that's kind of where I think this process, it's so superior than the other old school companies and most of the startups I saw. So on. So if you just have a startup, use the process, and I would say you're already 5 times better than your competitors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just the fact that you're making a science of your of your sales process instead of like relying on luck and feeling good and what have you, it just puts you like you said, like 5 steps ahead of anyone, because if something fails, why was that? Like, did I maybe fail on the decision criteria? That was there something technical? Was there something in infrastructure that we didn't be able to achieve, or whatever? Or is my metrics wrong? What is it, right? Am I taking too long in the paper process? Like, it turns it into like a scientific thing that can actually, if you fail or if you get slowed down or whatever, you already know why, because you know what you're doing actually.
I find it kind of funny that we never talked about what does Netpick means. Like, we just throw Netpick into the conversation, but we never described it. I don't know if it's necessary. Yeah. I think everyone can look it up easily. But there's probably, I don't know if you have any other questions or want to. I think the best part, which I see also in the whole process, is that if you train a sales team who learns to identify pain and is able to quantify it with the metrics, you learn so much insights for your product team as well. I mean, if you imagine like how much insights you generate, and that's usually the issue. You build a product, someone tries to sell. That's kind of the typical discussion between marketing and sales, but there's also discussion between product and sales, right? And if you train your people to identify the pain, identify the metric, man, you can, if you're a product-driven company, it's such a beauty to get so much insight. And that's, I guess, also something where I feel like it's so superior than any other model out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because this is the thing is, the feedback they get from sales is like the most honest and brutal feedback that we will get. Like, if someone does spend money on your product, they will tell you why. And if they don't, they tell you also why. Like, it's so honest and pure that you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
All right.
And maybe one last thing, what I'm doing, like just like a very pragmatic thing, like we're tracking down the companies John McMahon was involved with, and then we're tracking down the people who were like in those companies. And it's really this idea of like, we succeeded with the business, not when we raised the Series A or B from one of the top firms in Silicon Valley, but the first metric of success is, let's try to get this meeting with someone who has an affiliation with a similar product or service. And let's try to convince such a person to come on board and get feedback and advice why the person would not go on board, and then meet like 3 months later and see. And so like having really this, based on this alumni network and all of their experience and success, trying to really learn from them. How can you position? How can you adapt the product? How can you attract the right culture? And making this basically the benchmark for taking capital. That's like one of the real points where we try to apply it now, in order to learn from this amazing success they had like in Silicon Valley.
So just a question to you both, as you're more on the investment side. In sports, when you have like the managers or these companies that would sign upcoming athletes and what have you, they started a couple of years ago, like 5-6 years ago. They understood that they need to give, beside other things, also financial advice to these athletes, right, or to the musicians and what have you, so they can manage their wealth better and actually not be broke in 10 years. And I know that sometimes like you have these programs where like accelerators and what have you, where you get a little bit of this type of training for sales. Do you think like, what's your point of view, like when you do like seed investments or as an angel investor or whatever, like how much should you maybe ask them to do like a training on this approach of MEDDIC and similar things, just to get them on the right track, like Roman was saying, like early on infuse them basically with this kind of thinking, maybe. I don't know, what's your thoughts there?
100%, like 1,000%. I would infuse the process and everything from him into the startup. And I think the interesting part is, how do you do it if you have, let's call it, founders who think they can sell on their own? And what we did is we changed the narrative. That's what I said before. Like, rather than telling them, hey, okay, we do pre-seed now, these are the metrics, these are the numbers, then we're gonna do this and this and this, and need to learn what we want you to do. We just ask like, okay, who would be your dream investors? And I mean, if you talk to Savile Ventures and so on, I mean, these are VCs you would love to have, right? And then we changed the narrative, said like, okay, if you want to go there, we can show you a path. And the path is, we need to get a John McMahon approval. And if he approves it, you can raise from the best VCs out there. And that's how we try, like how I would try to kind of persuade them to follow the process, rather than trying to explain that you're so much more clever than them, because that's really hard, because they have the experience and they can be right, I can be wrong, but to get it done, I tried to change the narrative towards let's try to do the improvement by John McMahon, and from there you can get the best VCs out there. I don't know how you see it, Christian, but that's how I did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it depends a lot on the founder. So if a founder is a genius in sales and marketing already, it might make sense to, like the really good ones, we check like when we say, okay, the person is really good at sales and marketing, well, the person should intuitively do what John McMahon has discovered over the last 30 years, because then the person must be good by nature. So we can use the MEDDIC framework to see if the person has similar sales process. And the best thing is they never heard of John McMahon and just figure it out on their own. Perfect. And then we, of course, focus more like that the person is like learning in product and stuff. But when the person is a product founder, exactly what Roman mentioned is, well, we tell them, hey, did you ever hear of John McMahon? And in 99.9% of course not. And then we're like, do you want to build the next MongoDB? Do you want to have those investors? And the smart ones, during the call or meeting, they buy the book exactly during that time. They Google John McMahon, they say, is it this book? Okay, I read it. And the really smart ones have read it by the next meetings. And that's kind of how we approach it. Like, and then of course, like that's the beauty when you do early stage investing, you can really bake it into the company. And also you can say, if someone says, I don't care about John McMahon, I have my own John McMahon, I have my own sales process and I use HubSpot and I do it all the time, the same since 20 years, that's fine too, but we don't need to invest in that. So that's like beautiful. Like you don't need to do it then. And so it's way easier than like having a large team where you need to kind of convince everyone, like really setting the lines and then seeing it.
Yeah, I just think, as Roman was saying, that about the feedback and sales towards product teams. From my experience, I think it's just so beneficial for you, because if you already think in that type of fashion, right? So you think about the identifying the pain and competition, because competition is not just the other competition, like other companies doing the same thing, slightly different, you know. Competition in our case, for example, is also sometimes that people think, hey, should we look for some solution outside, or do we start a new initiative where we hire 15 students for $10 an hour, and that's already like, you know, the solution. And then you, but if you already think in this medic process or approach, then you're already like thinking about your product in a different way, because then you say, like, for example, with us, we say it doesn't make even any sense to hire like, you know, cheap manual labor, because what if videos come in automated fashion at 3 o'clock in the morning? Nobody works at 3 o'clock in the morning for $10 an hour, you know. So the overall thing is that if you already think that way, even though it's a sales thing, it makes your product thinking better. So that's why I was wondering, maybe, you know, it is an interesting approach to maybe not in full throttle, but it's to a certain degree infuse startups early on with this, so that you are like triggering them or teasing them in a certain direction that we already know, because it's such a scientific approach to sales. And also the experience tells us that it can just help you later on.
John McMahon.
That was actually way more fun than I thought this conversation, I think.
Hey, I really enjoyed it, but yeah, for me, that was one of the real best kept secrets. Like we call it the best kept secret because it got mentioned to us like this. But if I like the last years when we knew about him and learned on the fly, it really is one of the best kept secrets, especially in the whole growth, sales, and marketing environment.
Cool.
Yeah, great. I mean, there's a book for everyone who's interested. It came out, I guess, April or May 2021. So it's brand new, just John McMahon, Qualified Sales Leader. And I can highly recommend reading that. It's like, I guess it's going to become a classic over the next years.
Yeah. All right.
Cool, guys.
I mean, I guess we can wrap it up if there's any questions.
It was really fun to do it. Looking forward for the next time.
Yep. All right. Thank you for being here, Roman.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Take care.